In a recent video, we ranked 6 major units from the Grand Army of the Republic from the most to the least evil. Almost all of the clones were complicit in evil to some degree since they played a vital role in the establishment of the Empire, but on a relative scale, some were better than others. The same applies to units of clone commandos and ARC troopers, the elite clones who served in the Republic's Special Operations Brigade. Commando units tended to be smaller and less prominent in the story of the Clone Wars, but there are still a few well-known ones, and today we'll be ranking them from most to least evil as well.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Starting with the most evil, we have perhaps the most well-known Clone Commando unit, Delta Squad, the protagonists of Star Wars Republic Commando. Delta Squad was the most effective Clone Commando squad in the Republic, composed of 4 members: the no-nonsense team leader, Boss, the by-the-book slicer, Fixer, the explosive-loving Scorch, and the psychopathic sniper, Sev. They were a colourful cast of characters, but they were always on the darker side of the equation, especially Sev, who derived a disturbing amount of pleasure from killing. During the Clone Wars themselves, Delta Squad didn't do anything uniquely terrible, though Sev was especially brutal to members of what were considered enemy species, especially Geonosians, whom he made a point of killing wherever he could. They earned points for spending much of the war battling Trandoshan slavers on behalf of the Wookiees, which is based, but the novels make it abundantly clear that they would have no qualms with fighting on the other side if the Wookiees had been the ones to ally with the Separatists. Delta Squad, like most clones, were exclusively loyal to the Republic, and its members proved entirely willing to commit atrocities against those who opposed it, as Sev demonstrated with his personal mission to kill 5,000 Geonosians in retaliation for clone casualties in the First Battle of the War. It's what Delta Squad did after the war that earned them the title of most evil, however. After the rise of the Empire, Delta Squad, now minus Sev, who went missing in the Battle of Kashyyyk, spent its time murdering dissidents in Legends and massacring witnesses to Imperial cloning experiments in canon. In Legends, Delta Squad played a major part in finishing the Great Jedi Purge, but they also murdered clone deserters, Jedi sympathizers, and anyone else the Empire considered a political enemy. They were willing to slaughter their own brothers even after the war was over, enforcing the slavery of the clones even after it had served its purpose. We think that's sufficient grounds to say that even by clone standards, Delta Squad was decisively on the evil side, not only participating in the construction of the Empire, but actively and unquestioningly upholding it after the fact. The next evil commando team is Iowa Squad, a much less well-known group of clone commandos that fought under General Travis during the Battle of Garki at the end of the Clone Wars. They only had one major appearance, but it was impactful enough that we felt it merited including here. During the Battle of Garki, Republic forces did an oopsie and accidentally blew up a bunch of civilians shortly before the execution of Order 66. Iowa Squad's job was to find surviving civilians and bring them to a Republic refugee camp by force. They ended up finding a young boy in the ruins whose parents had just been killed by Republic shells, and they took him back to the Republic camp. There, Iowa Squad introduced the young boy to General Travis just before they received Order 66 and murdered the general in cold blood right in front of the poor kid, undoubtedly traumatizing him twice in one day. We don't think we need to explain this ranking. Iowa Squad's actions speak for themselves. Now we move on to the not-so-evil commando teams, beginning with Omega Squad. Omega Squad, for those of you who haven't read the Republic Commando novels, was composed of 4 clone commandos who lost the rest of their squads in the Battle of Geonosis. Mnina, their leader, Darman, their demolitions expert, Atin, their slicer, and Phi, their medic and sniper. If any of those names sound familiar, it's probably because we've talked about Darman before. He's the clone commando who knocked up a Padawan, if you remember that video. Omega Squad is pretty decisively split between based and cringe. On the one hand, they became disillusioned with the Republic when it became clear that Palpatine was making it into an empire, and they deserted after the Clone Wars, which is based. On the other hand, they weren't the most civilian-friendly people, and despite their opposition to the Empire, they completely accepted a lot of its sketchier values. They adhered to Mandalorian values, which, as we've discussed in the past, contained some pretty crappy cult of strength stuff. Omega Squad built a refuge for clones running from the Empire after the war, which is based, but it was also rather culty, which is not based. Lastly, they saw the Jedi Order as pretty much the same as the Sith and the Empire, which, while not evil, is extraordinarily cringe. Our next less evil commando unit is actually a squad of ARC troopers, the Munilants 10. Led by the legendary Captain Fordo, the Munilants 10 were probably the most well-known clone unit who've done absolutely nothing that allows us to assign them a moral ranking. They fought for the Republic, but not in an especially good or sketchy way, though they were instrumental in kneecapping the intergalactic banking clan, which is based, so we'll give them a few points there. On the whole though, we're going to consider the Munilants 10 neutral. Next, we have the Clone Commando unit that was actually on the better side of things, Ion Team. Led by Captain Climber, these guys fought in several of the fiercest battles of the late Clone Wars, including the Battle of Deconomoidia, the Battle of Boz Pitti, and the Battle of Mokana, all of which were clean fights on the Republic side. We don't know too much about the members of Ion Team itself, but what makes them stand out and what earns them their place on this list is what they did after the end of the Clone Wars. Ion Team was on Mokana when the war ended, fighting with General Rowan Shrine. They were with Shrine when Order 66 came through, but when they heard the order, the squad immediately and unanimously refused to even consider executing it. They figured at first that the Separatists were spoofing the signal, but even when they realized the order was real, they stuck to their guns and refused to turn on Shrine, ultimately saving his life from the other clones and helping him escape Mokana. When news of this reached Imperial Command, Darth Vader himself came to Mokana to monitor the situation, and these Chads remained defiant to his face, though it cost most of them their lives. Lastly, the least evil commando team we'll be discussing today is the only canon-only one on this list, Clone Force 99, better known as the Bad Batch. Unless you've been living under a rock, you know who these guys are. Originally composed of the Expert Tracker Hunter, the Human Tank Wrecker, the Walking Nerd Emoji Tech, and the Sev knockoff Crosshair, the team has gained new members in the form of Echo and Omega and lost Crosshair since their debut. During the Clone Wars, it's implied that they did a bit of sketchy stuff here and there, but after the end of the war, they abandoned the Empire and played a major role in the early fight against it, per Star Wars The Bad Batch, which makes them very based indeed. If you're not convinced the Bad Batch deserves its top spot on this list, then we'd recommend you just watch the show and review their history for yourself. It's a recent release and we've been covering it heavily, so we won't rehash everything they've done since. Nonetheless, we think their actions after the rise of the Empire speak for themselves, which is why they're getting the top spot today. But what do you think? Do you agree with our rankings, or do you have your own? Free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.